All right, good Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for hopping on NCSA Live. I'm David Kmisik, Senior Recruiting Manager here at the Next College Student Athlete. Really excited for today's show, today's topic. We've got a great guest joining us to talk about a hot button issue in the college athletic space. Certainly impacts recruiting as well. So thanks for tuning in, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whatever social network you're watching us on. But excited to have Cam Cox joining us. Cam is the I'm going to make sure I get this right. The Influence Program Coordinator
That's it.
University of Illinois. So Cam, excited to have you joining us. Obviously, the NIL is going to be our topic of conversation today, and you've been right in there at the U of I and kind of trying to figure out some of the initial steps here. So we're excited to chat with you a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and just glad to see you and talk through an area that I care a lot about and where I think there's some real opportunity.
Yeah, it could be a big hot button issue, even more so than it already has been. But just to kind of go over today's show, we're going to talk a little bit first and foremost about what is the NCAA NIL policy. I'm going to mess that up a couple times. We'll get to that in a second. But really want to make sure that high school student athletes know what do they need to know when it comes to the NIL process, and then how to talk to college coaches about the NIL as well. And then Cam's going to provide some expertise, having taking the role that he has at the University of Illinois, really leading that charge for the Fighting Illini program as well. But first and foremost, just you heard me slip up there earlier, but there's a difference between NIL and NLI when it comes to the recruiting process. NLI is the National Letter of Intent. That is what high school athletes, when they enter their senior year of high school, can sign to really be the kind of contract for a verbal commitment. That's going to be the pen to paper. That's going to put a student athlete officially on that team or heading to that university to play for that sport. NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. So many of you guys have probably heard a lot about this over the past few months. On June 30th, the NCAA Division I Board of Directors approved an interim name, image, and likeness policy that allows D1, D2, D3 student athletes to ultimately be compensated for their NIL. So that was effective as of July 1st, so about a month and a half ago. So again, a lot of new things in the space when it comes to the NIL, which is, again, why we're lucky to have Cam on. But the NCAA ultimately chose to kind of have this default to existing to the state, the college, the university, the conference, which means that athletes really need to research the state laws first and foremost, as well as work with compliance departments to understand their school, their conference rules. College student athletes competing in states without an NIL law will have the freedom to receive compensation for their NIL however they see fit, as long as they do not violate the pay to play or receive financial incentives to sign with or remain at a specific school. So there's a lot of fine details that we'll talk about. But before we get involved with Cam, really want to hit on how this impacts high school student athletes. Again, most of the student athletes, the families that we work with, are high school athletes trying to get into that college level. So as of now, only California high school athletes can pursue the NIL opportunities without jeopardizing their eligibility. California just is a little bit ahead of the game and has been for quite some time when it comes to this. But for student athletes interested in competing at the college level, there's a ton of resources that you can look into to review during the recruiting process if you do decide to plan on pursue an NIL opportunity heading into college. Again, state laws are going to be really important. Individual states have begun proposing and passing their own laws. Student athletes should really consult the likes of an NIL network, which is a website, and you can certainly check out our website as well. ncsasports.org has a ton of great information. But how to know if this is something that you can do as a high school athlete. It's again more so for the college athletes right now, but we already have seen one example of one high school basketball player who linked up with a company and is beginning to kind of start getting some income based on his name, image, and likeness already as a high school junior, a basketball player. So it is impacting some high school, again, very, very little high school athletes at this point. But each individual school, again, has oversight of NIL deals. They have the right to object to a deal if it conflicts with existing agreements. So the best way to ensure student athletes understand the school-specific rules is to work directly with coaches, the compliance department. That's going to be really the best way to kind of go about it. But Cam, I want to kind of have you come in here. I mean, you've been just recently put into a position at the University of Illinois. The NIL process is something that's been talked about for a long time, the right to have college athletes be able to make some income off their own name, their own image, their own likeness. It's not reflecting necessarily the university brand or anything specific to being an athlete at that school. But what have you noticed? You've been in this game now for about a month and a half, but the NIL process, it's a big deal. It's going to really impact college sports.
Yeah, and again, thanks for having me. I'll say one of the big things I've noticed is just how huge of a change it is and how hard it is for everyone to wrap their mind around everything that is possible. I always like to say that in this new NIL world, there's about this much that's prohibited and about this much that's allowed. And everyone has taken kind of a different approach to how comfortable they are with that. I'll say, I was talking to a parent and they had a few questions about what their daughter could pursue. And the dad says, eventually he says, this is like legalized cheating. I said, well, cheating isn't really legalized, but if you think about it, this is just a new world. And he said, you know what? You're right. It's just new. It's just a new world. And it's a lot to kind of put in the hands of student athletes and their families as they kind of think about how they're going to navigate it. I think another thing that I have noticed is being very prevalent is an appreciation for what student athletes are going to be up against, in that they're going to have to really think actively about creating a brand and what it is that they want to hold out to the world, what it is that they want to create, and what they're really about. And then when they're doing that, then they have to think about, how do I monetize that? And I think that it's interesting because you kind of have this first, oh, wait, I don't know, I'm a little hesitant about that. And then you move to the, okay, yeah, everything's easy. We'll just go for it. And then you kind of walk back and say, wait a minute, there's some steps here that I maybe wasn't thinking about that I needed to take. And that has to do with kind of effective branding. And so that's what a lot of our approach has been about educating our student athletes about how to build brands effectively and how to make sure that they're able to monetize those, and then how to make sure that those things are financially healthy.
Yeah, when we talk about building your brand, social media obviously plays a huge part in that. And again, for high school athletes who are looking to be college athletes, something just to keep them in mind as you kind of go through your high school years. But I think first and foremost, Cam, what's very unique about the NIL process, number one, is just your position at the University of Illinois. You're going to see, I think, more and more schools start to have an NIL expert, so to speak, to help their student athletes. This is going to be a huge hook for universities to try to get kids to come to their school. And then once they're at that school, is find ways for them to get opportunities to earn some extra income regarding this process. So just first and foremost, talk about your position. It's unique. It's maybe an added bonus to the NIL process that maybe you never even thought of.
Yeah. So I first off, let me say, I think you're absolutely right. I think that schools that want to take a serious approach to NIL need to make sure that they have an NIL specific person, just because what I do every day interacts with every part of the athletic department, other than facilities. And sometimes I still also work with facilities. And so it's important that you have kind of one, spearhead, quarterback, kind of intersection of the wheel, whatever you want to call it, but kind of one person who spearheads and leads that initiative. And that's what I do at Illinois. So I am in charge of kind of everything that has to do with NIL. I don't have the answer necessarily to every single thing, but I kind of am in charge of figuring out where to get that answer. I am the outward face, but I can assure you that there's an entire team of people here at Illinois who are focused on this. And we're just excited to take advantage of the new landscape and benefit our student athletes. I mean, I know I keep saying it, but there's just a tremendous opportunity to empower our student athletes. And so we're kind of doing everything we can. And when it comes to educating about trademarks, it may be, okay, I need to talk to licensing. When it comes to business leaders who have questions about what's possible, then it becomes a discussion with me and some of our fundraising people. When it comes to, obviously, there's a lot of times where coaches have questions about what's possible, or maybe they're hearing stuff and say, well, I heard these people are doing that. Can we do it? And I may say, well, we can do that. We're looking into it. Or I may say, well, based on our state law, we can't quite do that. And so there's a lot of questions that happen there. There's obviously student athletes who are fielding interest from businesses. And they're also told to, and kind of, I think, are listening a little bit, to come to me about those things too, and say, okay, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, can I do this? Well, what if I take this type of picture? Well, what if I want to rent this building? Well, can I have it here? And there's a lot of different parts that will intersect. And I think it's been really, really challenging, but also very rewarding to have the opportunity to help out everybody in that way, kind of simultaneously.
Sure. Just want to make sure anyone that's watching, if you have any questions again about this specific topic, we certainly want to utilize Cam while he's here. So how has the University of Illinois adapted? It's been, what, 47, 48 days? What's
Something like that.
that you've seen? How have the athletes, the coaches made those adjustments? I mean, you talked about just the uncertainty or the lack of knowledge around a lot of it. Prior to the NIL, there was so much concern about eligibility and am I going to ruin my status? Am I getting kicked out of school or suspended?
Right.
This. What's been the biggest maybe surprise or the biggest thing that you've seen here in the first 47 days of this process?
I'd say the biggest surprise has been kind of converting from, just like you were saying, what we thought was going to happen to what is actually happening. And I think so far, one thing I'll give you an example is that there was a concern initially that there were going to be all kinds of folks holding themselves out as agents who were not really agents, and were taking advantage of student athletes, and student athletes were going to hire these people and give them all their money, right? That hasn't happened. We've seen by and large that student athletes are not hiring agents in huge numbers. And that's something that has made us, and this is just an example, but it has made us adjust a little bit of our education strategy, because we were talking more about, well, maybe not enough of you guys are hiring agents. And so we kind of talk about, well, this is the value of having representation. And we thought about how can we go about vetting some of those representatives or potential representatives. So that's kind of one example of something where it was different than we thought it was going to be. I think another thing that's really important, and I want everybody to know this out here because I believe it, and it's also just where the numbers are, is that this is not just for men's basketball and football. I want to be very clear about that. We have seen deals in the market and here at Illinois for all of our sports. And there's a belief by a lot of people in the market, and I share this view, that the tip-top earners in the NIL space will most likely be women, the tip-top 4 or 5 every year, that there will be a big top quartile that is largely dominated by men's basketball and football, but that everyone else is going to be likely ultimately going to be female student athletes as well. Just generally, fundamentally, this is about brand building, and in general, young women do a better job than young men of building up those brands. And so we've seen that. There was some prediction that wouldn't be the case, but we've seen it. I'd say that of the questions I field, I would probably say the majority of them are from our female student athletes. And so that's been a welcome thing to see as we kind of make sure that this is something that can benefit our whole group.
Yeah, and we're at NCSA. I mean, we're working with deals with all sports, like you said. So I think most people kind of gravitate towards the money-making sports, the big-ticket sports, football, basketball. But as you mentioned, can really stretch across all sports. I've read articles about swimming and gymnastics. Student athletes have a lot of great opportunities out there.
Oh, tremendous opportunities! I'll tell you, I was such a believer in gymnastics that I went to our gymnastics team, like our gymnastics girls, went on the mat, and it's like, look, I mean, I just made them a separate handout, and one page was like, this is why NIL is for you, and the second page was, these are all the examples of NIL deals that have happened with gymnasts across the country. Because I wanted them to really focus on that. And there's so much potential. We've seen it in softball. I mean, I'll say that there's one softball team in the country has 2 girls who've made their own t-shirts and are selling them like hotcakes down south. We've seen it in volleyball. There's one woman a couple states over who has been doing a bunch of stuff and recently today announced a jewelry line. There's so much power in just brand building. And if you're really conscious about how to build a good, healthy, and productive brand, you can see some real money in this thing.
So there was some twins at Fresno State that have been big on TikTok that have utilized that to make a bunch of money. So it spreads across different mediums. It's not just, hey, a company saying, hey, can you endorse our brand? It's very individualized too, I think, in terms of the social media aspect. It'd be interesting to see what happens with podcasts and all the different things that come along. What's next in this process? I mean, obviously it's a very new process, but like, where do you see it going from here as the wheels start to turn? They're just starting to kind of get in motion. How big does this really get, and how quickly do you think it can really grow to be what some people maybe expect or think that it will be?
That's a great question. I think it can grow limitlessly. The ideas that I have tossed around in my head and tossed around our athletic department are a lot bigger than where we are now. Like you said, the wheels are just starting to turn. But as the wheels turn, you're starting to see things that are really productive. I'll say that there was a huge deal that happened last week at BYU where they were able to partner with a local company and make sure that all of the walk-ons on BYU's football team were able to earn NIL compensation in an amount that was equivalent to their scholarship. And that was obviously very impactful. And it was very creative, but that was the type of thing that I see where the roots of that were, because you can see where it's going. And I think that there's tremendous power. I've been telling all my teams this, and I will tell all of you all this. There's tremendous power in the collective. I noticed that down in Kentucky, their men's basketball team is thinking about holding a showcase. I think there's about 8 or 9 of those guys who are just going to kind of have a 3-point contest and dunk contest and a couple other things, and they're going to kind of share the revenue of that together. And so I think that as the space evolves, there's going to start to be more of an emphasis on the collective and less of an emphasis on an individual. And I think that's for a few reasons. I think it's one, because major companies are able to do more from a marketing standpoint when they just have more bodies to deal with. You can see why a major company would want to have one team at one school. That'd be great as a collective endeavor, but may want to have the rights to all of the teams at 15 schools. That would be even more powerful when they're thinking about kind of how they want to set up a marketing campaign. And so I think that is going to have a lot to do with it, is that people are going to want to kind of band together and think about what they can create. And then when that happens, it's not clear exactly how far it's going to go. That's why I said that it's limitless. I think that there's a lot of power around specific targeted messaging. I mean, I can imagine a world where you want to promote just basketball in general and kind of basketball expertise, and you say, well, I want these 6 young women, and I want these 5 young men, and then I want these other 5 young men and these other 10 young women, and then we're going to have them all do a basketball camp in a major city that's a major hub, right? I think that's something that could eventually happen. I think that will require a few more hands in the pot, just because one thing that we are restricted by here at Illinois, and that many states are restricted by, is that the universities are not able to facilitate the NIL transactions. And we can talk more about that kind of later. But because of that, it's going to take someone else to kind of coordinate that effort together. But I think that as the wheels are starting to turn, you're starting to see the roots of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how things have already turned in motion. I saw a rival school of yours in the Big Ten, a group of their offensive linemen are sponsors now of barbecue joints. Poor barbecue joint's going to get eaten out of all its food probably here in the next couple months. But obviously, we think of the D1s, the powerhouses, the big athletes that we see on ESPN all the time that are impacted. How do you think this impact will trickle down maybe to the D2 and D3 levels that aren't maybe as spotlighted as University of Illinois and some of the bigger Division I schools?
I think it's going to happen in a similar way. It's a question I get fairly regularly, and it's going to happen in a similar way, but just to less of a degree. I think it's still going to be about the collective. I think it's still going to be about selling that expertise. Hey, if you're D2 or D3, it's not like you're coming there and saying, I'm going to put in a D3 effort, I'm putting in a D2 effort. And people recognize that. People understand that, if you're running track for D2, that, you're a whole hell of a lot faster than I am. And there's some real power in that. There's some power in what you can sell. There's some power in what your voice means, specifically when it comes to things that would have to do with, say, tracker fitness or whatever, or gear around those things. And I think it's just about creating that brand and that image and thinking about it in a really specific type of way, creating your own strategy, and then saying, okay, this is what I want to target. And I don't think that changes tremendously to the D2 or D3 level. And it's just candidly because I don't think that there are that many student athletes that are really household names, just to be honest. I think that, every few years you will have a guy like a Zion Williamson, or you may have a Trevor Lawrence, or, even a Justin Fields, or guys like that. But that doesn't happen every year. And it doesn't happen on every team, and it definitely doesn't happen on every D1 team. And so I don't think D2 or D3 student athletes should be discouraged and say, oh, well, I play for a smaller school. Maybe your platform initially is a little bit smaller, but it's not an insurmountable disadvantage that you're at. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for you as well.
There probably won't be an immediate impact when it comes to schools recruiting kids, but down the road, that's definitely something that could be coming about with many of our families being high school athletes and looking for opportunities to play in college. What advice would you have for an incoming maybe high school recruit or someone that's looking to play a sport in college, and on thoughts they can have around the NIL? Or do you think it will impact recruiting to any level? anytime soon, or do you think that will maybe happen right away?
I think it'll happen right away. I think the truth is that an effective NIL program is just a part of a student athlete's experience, right? So having a strong business school, or having a beautiful campus, or having a strong alumni network, or any of the things that we have here at Illinois, I think that having an effective NIL strategy will become a part of that as well. So because we can't facilitate the transactions and NIL opportunities can't be used as a recruiting inducement, you won't be able to say, hey, I want to come to your school. I heard so-and-so got $200,000. I want $200,000. It won't work like that. But schools will have the ability to say, look how good of a job that we've done over the past year, 2 years, 3 years as this continues to go forward. Don't you want to be a part of that? And you want to be at one of those schools that's able to sell that. You don't want to be a school that's not able to sell that, because they're working behind. And so I think if I were a prospective student athlete, I would ask questions, and specifically with respect to NIL. And I would say, what resources do you have in place to help me develop myself with respect to these opportunities? And there are going to be some schools who have the whole thing. They're going to have an NIL guy. They're going to have other folks who are focused on NIL. They're going to have like our influence program, a flagship program. They're going to have policies. They're going to have all these things in place. And that's a place you should look at and say, hey, they're serious about this. They're serious about promoting me. They're serious about giving opportunities. You're going to ask other schools, and they're going to say, oh, we're doing all kind of stuff for NIL. And you say, well, what are you doing? And then you ask those questions. I like to say, you look at the structure behind the cell. So you say, do you have someone who spearheads NIL? No, we don't really have that. Okay, well, do you have a flagship program? Do you have a specific NIL program that is designed to take a strategy and take an approach that shows a level of proactivity around this? Well, we're kind of getting around to it. Do you have an NIL policy? Well, we kind of have an informal well, then when it comes to NIL, that's a school that probably you don't want to look at as closely for that. So I would ask those questions. I would really look at the structure, and I think a lot about it, because it is just a feature of your experience, but an important feature.
So just to kind of reiterate, the universities themselves really aren't going to be playing a direct part in this. So it's not a matter of a school paying a player to come to their university. I know that's been something that's been talked about in the world, or booster involvement, whatever the case might be. So really, for the most part, this is very student athlete driven, Cam, with the support of the university. The university isn't really the one necessarily fully driving this bus, if that makes sense. Am I correct in saying that?
You're right on the money there. I think the university's role is more of a background role. Obviously, the university creates the platform. A lot of the people who are going to be the most interested in working with student athletes for NIL opportunities are going to be those who are also interested in the university. And so I do think the university kind of plays a tertiary role there, but it definitely is not the primary or secondary role. I think the two superstars are the student athlete and the business that wants to work with them. But again, that's not to say the university doesn't have any role. I do a lot of educating of, like I said, coaches and student athletes on one hand and kind of businesses on the other hand, but I kind of drop out of there to work together and make it happen.
So you're providing the guidance, the education, getting them to home plate, and then hopefully they're the one taking the swing there at the plate.
Absolutely.
Cool. What resources are out there for for people that want to know more and really get more educated and kind of figure out the process? What's the best way for student athletes to learn more about this process? What are you pumping out educationally to some of your student athletes at the U of I? How are you trying to get them caught up, knowing again it is such a new world, but also going to be a kind of an ever-evolving world too as the months continue to go on?
I'd say it's a few things. I think a lot of times your best resource is just going to be your local administrator, the local person who at the biggest school that is around you is focused on NIL. They will have the answers to a lot of the questions you want to know, because one thing I think that gets lost in this a lot of times is that all this is informed by state law, right? So if you are here in Champaign, it may be more intuitive to you that your local person is me. But if you are somewhere closer to Southern Illinois, if you're somewhere closer to Northern Illinois, it may not be as obvious to you, but we kind of still have the same law, right? We all live in Illinois. And so anyone in your state is going to be somebody that's good to call and ask questions, because they're going to know, specifically because, like I said, some schools will have a specific NIL person, some schools will not. So you're going to want to call the NIL person. I think another thing to educate yourself are recruiting services like NCSA, watching things like this. Open Doors will also put these types of things on. Influencer will put these types of things on, and being focused and clued in there is helpful. And I'll have to put another plug for it because I said it earlier, but it's focusing on representation, your ability to say, you know what, maybe just have a quick consultation call and just start to think about these things, because I will say there are a number of attorneys who are focused on this and marketing agents who have their eyes on this as well. So arming yourself with education is really the key here as we enter this new gray area. And there are resources for you. Obviously, there will be websites. I'll say with Illinois, we have the Influence website, and the Influence website has our policy. It has a couple other resources. It has a few other forms, and should give you a good picture of what our approach is. Again, if you are an Illinois family, it's probably going to be a little bit more pertinent to you than if you are, say, a Kansas family. But I think it's still informative, and there's some value to you just digging around a little bit on the internet.
I'm sure there's a lot of student athletes that are trying to figure this process out, just like the rest of us. Do you have any do nots for athletes at this point? Is there anything, I'm sure some student athletes might be a little worried, maybe, hey, if I do this, is it going to affect my eligibility? How do they find the balance between knowing, what's okay for them to do, what's cleared for them to do without risking anything? Again, that's been something that, for the previous amount of time, that's been a thing that college athletes have had to worry about. Now they have to open their mind to it. Are there any do nots for athletes when it comes to the NIL, and or is it just a matter of really making sure that you're doing your homework, your due diligence, relying on experts like yourself before really agreeing or doing anything that's going to potentially, monetize anything for your budget?
I think the number one do not get impatient. Just take time, do the diligence, ask questions. I think there are a lot of things in this gray area where you might get away with it, but you might not. But how much do you lose by just doing the thing that is above board? So when it comes to, and I think this is going to happen, I'm sure there are some student athletes already thinking about it. If you are already done playing in high school, your eligibility is expired, and hey, come fall, I guess it's fall now, but say hypothetically this is April and you play a spring sport, and hey, come fall, I'm going to show up on campus. There will be probably an appeal to say, let me go ahead and just enter into this NIL transaction. I haven't yet enrolled, but no one will know. It'll be fine. Really take some time to think about that. Be patient and say, okay, what benefit am I adding by getting 2 months ahead when I could get the same deal 2 months from now when I am enrolled and everything will be okay? I think there's a lot of tendency to get ahead of ourselves, and I just encourage people not to do that. I think some of the other stuff just has to do with basic compliance. So that's understanding that the university can't facilitate. That's not allowing things to be used as a recruiting inducement. That's understanding that this isn't a pay for play, that it has to be based on something you're actually doing to receive the money. It can't just be, oh, well, because you're on the team. But I think the big part is just don't get impatient.
For sure. It makes sense, right? If people aren't seeing that endorsement deal coming in right away, or whatever the case is, they can be a little antsy. If you got any questions again for Cam, jot them down there. We're getting a couple coming in, so we'll get to these here in a few seconds. But looking forward, Cam, what do you think is the biggest area of opportunity, or the biggest kind of unknown maybe to come out when it comes to the NIL? I think one of the things for me is we haven't really seen that huge deal maybe that you were expecting, like you mentioned, Zion Williamson or Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields, some of the guys. Even looking back to thinking about like a Johnny Manziel or a Tim Tebow back in the day, these guys probably would have reaped the benefits of it. Where do you see this going? What excites you the most? What has you even the most maybe uncertain about the potential of?
Oh man,
I'm putting you on the spot here, I know.
I'll say, I thought I could do is just just think about like, man, there's so much that's possible. So I'll say this. I do think that you're going to have those mega deals that come in the next little bit. I do think that it'll happen in the next few weeks. I don't think they're going to be the Tim Tebow. I don't think they're going to be the Johnny Manziel. I don't think they're going to be the Zion Williamson. I think that there are a couple of, and I don't have any real evidence of knowing this, just to be clear. I think there are going to be a couple of the Olympic athletes who are back home who are going to be that kind of person, who they have a story that doesn't happen every year. They have a story that is very, very unique, and that they're going to be able to monetize that in a way that before NIL was not possible. And that's why you saw people win a gold medal and then say, oh, I was committed to go to, say, Illinois, but now I'm not going to go. I think that there's going to be some real marketing power that's tapped into there now. I think that as the market settles, it will become more clear to people kind of what they want to get out of it. I think right now people aren't as sure, am I the kind of person who's going to be a tip-top earner? Am I going to be the kind of person who's kind of a bottom person who has a bunch of different things? Am I going to get paid in merchandise mainly? Am I going to get paid in cash? And, you know, I've seen people get paid in equity in company. I think that that's going to become more settled. But I think if I had to, I'll give it to you. The thing that I'm probably the most excited about is still the collective thing. I am a big believer in student athlete rights, student athlete autonomy. I love the idea that the student athletes could work together and think about what it is that they have to sell. I love the idea that the student athletes could sell that to businesses and communities that are particularly interested in them, and just the idea of kind of combining, you know, huge alumni bases with huge bases of student athletes. That just gets me really, really excited, and I'm excited to see it happen.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said too, right? It's all about the name, the image, the likeness. So if any of your University of Illinois athletes, you know, have a deal or anything signed up, they can't be wearing the University of Illinois stuff, right? The school is separate from their name, their image, their likeness. I think that's an important piece where, again, you as an individual are really going to make an impact in terms of, you know, what's your X factor? What's your brand? Is it social media? Is it creating T-shirts? Is it, you know, barbecue restaurants, right? Whatever that is. But again, just to reiterate, it is separate from the university. I know even when you watch, you know, commercials, a lot of times you'll see NFL guys wearing the generic colored jersey that
the blue shirt
logo or the brand logo, but you're not going to see individuals wearing an Illinois football jersey in a commercial for whatever the case is, right? That is separate, where again, it's the student athlete that really is their own personal brand more so than the university being tied to that individual.
So that's by and large true. I will say that there are a number of exceptions to that. It just depends on how it is structured, and you know, the business will have to think about what the value of, you know, this other way, this block eye is to them. In that case, I think that every university is different about protecting its trademarks or its trade names or different things, right? You can see how, you know, for us, Illinois in the context of the university is one thing. Illinois in the context of state, we don't really have much control over, as opposed to you think about, you know, another university where we'll say Auburn, which is only kind of thought of as a university. It's a little different. I think that some schools are more protective of their colors than other schools. And so you'll have to kind of consider the specific school and what their specific approach is to that specific issue. But there are ways where you can do NIL transactions with university marks, university logos, and things like that. But it's a lot more complicated. And, you know, it's just like you said, because fundamentally it's about kind of your name, image, likeness, voice, and a business. And it's not about kind of appropriating this for that.
And then again, that's where the state laws, the individual school, they're going to really be the one to help kind of guide student athletes towards
Correct.
What's be, you know, allowed, what's not going to be allowed. We've got a question, so when I get to this one here, Cam, this is from Caroline. She's a student athlete who is a pretty good volleyball player. She gives lessons individually, and curious, she's committed to a D1 program. So can she start to hold camps, showcases after the season? You sort of talked about the University of Kentucky basketball guys maybe doing something with camps. So for an incoming, you know, freshman, for someone who's a senior in high school right now, as they begin to kind of get ready, if they're committed to a D1 program, what are they allowed to do in terms of that? And again, I know it's very state-based and very, you know, school-based, but is that where the potential is for maybe high school athletes who are committed to D1 schools that can get involved with camps, or that have a local, you know, brand in their community or in their city?
I think that there might be some opportunity there. I think that's a complicated question, because it almost goes to the hypothetical I mentioned before, where it's like right before. That's the same one where I'd say just I would encourage you not to get impatient. I think that, for instance, in our state, you cannot enter into NIL activities before you enroll at the school in any institution. I think that you're going to have a more difficult time if you try to do it kind of in that summer, because you'd say, well, what if I do it on my own and I haven't enrolled there, but I also am done here? I think that you may want to ask your compliance department about what their interpretation of that will be, because on one hand, if it's totally separate from the school and there's nothing it has to do, then it's like, well, what does that kind of have to do with what I'm going to start to do in the fall? On the other hand, in Illinois, you'd be violating the state law, because I could say, well, I know that you did this, and I know that it was before you enrolled, and now we kind of have a problem. So I'd encourage you just to wait and to talk to your compliance department about what their perspective would be on something like that, because it's a gray area.
Yeah. Anything else, Cam, that I missed that you think is important to touch on when it comes to the NIL? Again, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of learning on your end as well. But anything that I missed that you think is important for people to know?
Nothing in particular. I think the biggest thing, I said it once, I'm going to say it again, is this is really for everyone. I'm glad that our question came from volleyball. I really am, because I think there was such a narrative that, oh, this is all about football, it's all about men's basketball, and we are seeing a lot of football deals. I don't plan to diminish those. I don't want to speak down on those. But part of that is because it's brand new. Another part of that is because it's about to be football season. But I don't want people who are in other sports and families who have prospective student athletes in other sports to think, oh, I don't need to pay attention to this, or this isn't for me, because I really do think that it's going to be for everyone. I think there's tremendous opportunity, and I think that with a little bit of creativity, you can find a lot of reward.
Yeah, I'm sure it's exciting for you to be able to kind of help and assist in that, and give student athletes the ideas that they didn't have. And I know there's a little discussion too about how this may impact financial aid and scholarship potential as well. That's a lot that's being figured out as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I'll bring up kind of two big points on that. So the first thing has to do with, we'll talk about kind of the need-based financial aid, and then we'll talk about the other bad guy about international student athletes. So when it comes to need-based financial aid, it's just something to keep on your radar, because need-based financial aid is always based on kind of income thresholds. And conceivably, depending on what your income threshold was reported to be, you could jeopardize your need-based financial aid by earning a certain amount of NIL income. So hypothetically, if your need-based financial aid package were $10,000, okay, pretty solid, but the income threshold for that was $35,000 for your family's income. Okay. Imagine your family reported making $32,000. Then if you make over another $3,000, so if you get above that $35,000, you could potentially lose all $10,000 of your need-based financial aid. And so you don't want to do that. I think that is a very family-specific decision, because there are also ways around that about, kind of claiming children on taxes and other things like that. But it's something just to be on your radar. I talk about it not in the specific sense, but in the general sense that, hey, if you're going to earn NIL compensation, you're going to want to just check and make sure, hey, I'm not going to trigger any thresholds here, because it might get a little hairy. Another thing I will say is that for international student athletes, the majority of them are going to be here, and by the majority, I mean essentially everyone, is going to be here with a student visa. Student visas have very strict prohibitions against work. And so international student athletes who don't have green card or dual citizenship or something else like that are going to be largely prohibited from NIL activities, at least from the time being. That's something that has to do with the Department of Homeland Security, and there's no athletic department in the country has quite been able to figure out how to get to yes on that just yet.
Yeah, we talk about the athletic recruiting process from high school to college being complicated. The NIL is certainly figuring itself out. A lot of little
a little wrinkle, doesn't it?
Little wrinkles in there, but that again, it's an exciting part that, like you said, I've been talking about for a long time. I'm not going to date myself and tell you when, but in college, I wrote a paper about why college athletes should get opportunities to be monetized for this. So
great.
So some years later, finally came into
play. We'll say it was 2 or 3 years back. That's what I like to say.
A little more than that, but I appreciate your kindness there for sure. Awesome. Well, again, we appreciate the expertise, the knowledge. Again, I think the overall arching theme is this is still so new, and there's a lot still to be kind of uncovered and unwrapped, and a lot of really excitement, I think, and uncertainty around what's going to happen. But again, the potential, like you said, is there, and it really comes across all divisions, all sports, all schools. But again, knowing your state laws, connecting with people at the university, making sure your compliance is in place, again, is going to be really important, especially early on in this process. I think knowing that there still is a lot of kind of uncharted territory when it comes to this process.
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me. I'm happy to advise people and help out as I can, to the extent that anybody has questions. My email is online, and it's just kcox@illinois.edu. And I'd be happy to answer those questions over email or talk through them with you or whatever. I know everyone's situation is different and sometimes can be helpful, but I'm passionate about this. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and to the extent that people need help in this gray area, I'm willing to help you even if you don't have the black eye on.
So when I start blowing your email up with questions, if you
right, until I get too many, then I was like, no, I'm blaming it all on NCSA. But no, truly, I get those questions from folks just around the state and other stuff, and I'm happy to help. So
awesome, cool. We'll get Cam. We can't thank you enough. Again, this has been a hot button issue, and again, it's still a lot of uncertainty around kind of the potential for what it brings. But I know a lot of college athletes are excited about it, and hopefully high school athletes, when they get into college in a couple of years, will have a little bit more stability with what to look for and how to approach this. So again, Cam Cox from the University of Illinois. Again, Cam, thank you so much for the expertise, and again, we'll continue to be leaning on you for any wisdom you have around the NIL.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Cool, awesome. So just to kind of wrap things up, again, college athletes are now eligible to really benefit financially from their name, their image, their likeness. Again, part of the NIL process that was rolled out, really effective July 1st. Again, high school athletes in all states, really except California, are not yet eligible to pursue that NIL. So again, for any student athletes who have any questions, consult your state laws. If you're a college athlete, go to your school. If you're a high school athlete, again, just make sure you're checking all your boxes, crossing your T's, dotting your I's before you do anything that, again, could still potentially affect eligibility or anything with your potential college years as well. So again, big thanks to Cam Cox for coming on. Next week, we're going to be back on here talking a little bit about scholarships, some of the ways to pay for college, piggybacks right off with the NIL process. But as Cam mentioned as well, with financial aid scholarships, there's a lot of different moving pieces in that. So we're going to dive further into that next Tuesday here on NCSA Live. So again, big thanks to Cam from the University of Illinois. Appreciate you guys tuning in as well. Hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday.